Now to discuss these, Sally and I are joined by Alpes of Profinium Partners. Great to see you. Thanks for coming in. Starting with the independence, the disunited nations, and the leaders there. In Russia, Vladimir Putin compares this to the Crusades. The Turkish say should not end up as an occupation. And just the other day, NATO meeting, and it's still unclear who's going to take the lead when America takes a back seat.
Oh, God, the journalists must have been really bored on this one, because if the UN had done nothing, they would have had UN impotent. The UN does something, and then they're looking for little differences between them. You know what actually annoys me about this? First of all, where the heck is the Arab League? I know they've been whinging a little bit on the fringes, but look at Saudi Arabia. Billions, if not trillions, in armaments. But no, they'll send somebody into Bahrain in order to undertake police action, but they won't step up in their own backyard, so the West has to do their dirty work for them yet again. But why aren't they stepping up to clean up their own problems? That's what really annoys me about this.
But the British Prime Minister got the support of Parliament in Monday's vote. I mean, pretty much a full endorsement of his actions. But I think what remains unclear for many people is, what's the end game? What happens after Gaddafi, if there is an after Gaddafi?
Well, as they said in Parliament, I was listening to the debates late last night, is the first thing was that this action had to be undertaken to save civilian lives, to protect the people in Libya. What comes at the end of it, we could have debated forever and a day, and we would have had the newspapers, the Independent included, saying no action being taken. What also infuriates me about this is India, a non-permanent member of the Security Council at the moment, together with Germany and Brazil, all three abstained. India, the world's largest democracy, also refused to step up, and yet it wants a permanent seat on the Security Council. Not mature enough. Not mature enough to take responsibility, and therefore not mature enough to have a permanent seat on the Security Council.
But then that brings us on to, again, that next story that we have in Le Figaro, the end game. What is the end game for the Allies? It's saying that it is the Gaddafi must leave. Are you saying that those members should step up and actually make that a resolution?
Absolutely right. They should go well beyond what we've got at the moment, which is humanitarian relief, and say, you know what, saddle up, there's democracy coming your way, whether you like it or not, because it's the only way to avoid these kinds of 18th, 17th, 16th century conflicts, which keep on happening in African countries and in Arabic countries, and they all tend to have something in common. They don't have elections every 4 years, and we've got to step in the West.
They have oil as well, don't they?
Security and trade. You're absolutely right. It's not in Western national interest to go around spending this kind of money, clearing up their mess on humanitarian grounds alone every single time. Trade and security. And Parliament, British Parliament made it absolutely clear. So make no mistake, Somalia and Zimbabwe are safe for now, and there's a lot of African dictatorships at the moment, they're not the only continent which have dictatorships, saying to themselves, please God, don't let them find oil here. And they're right for that, and there's nothing wrong with that. National security and trade, that's what we're concerned about.
But you talk about national security and trade, and your earlier criticism of countries like Saudi Arabia. Isn't it in their interest to keep a distance? If you're looking at purely from a pragmatic national interest position, Saudi Arabia doesn't want to get involved because it draws attention, obviously, to their own issues of human rights.
Oh, absolutely.
Same thing in Bahrain and Yemen.
Totally in their interest to keep quiet and keep their head under the blanket, lest the gaze of Western democracy falls upon them and they shiver and shudder at what might be coming their way. You know, you're absolutely right. But they're not stepping up, and if they don't step up, they should shut up.
Looking at the Gulf news now, top commanders deserting Ali Abdullah Saleh, the leader of Yemen. The West must find itself in a very difficult position. I mean, he's been there for something like, four decades, but he's a key ally in the fight against Al-Qaeda. He receives U.S. funding, and now you have a situation where virtually, everyone is deserting him.
They are deserting. I don't think it is actually a difficult position for the West, because I think in terms of the long-term allies that you might have in order to fight Al-Qaeda, you'd rather take the short-term alternative of let's get some democracy into these countries, because otherwise we constantly get drawn into conflict from the West. We're constantly having to clear up their messes because they don't know how to live in a civilized manner. And make no mistake, the West wasn't civilized before the end of the Second World War either. That's why it was in a mess, but it sorted its house out over the last 70 years. And unless these other regions do it themselves, we're going to be constantly dragged in. And it's the youth in Yemen. They want to just Facebook Facebook, Twitter, be entrepreneurs. They want to own iPads. That's what it is. And unless they get democracy, unless they get elections, it's not going to happen.
It would be interesting to hear from the youth if their life aspirations include having an iPad.
Is this different? Is the situation in Yemen, though, different to the situation in Libya?
At one level, no. You're talking about dictatorships, you're talking about human rights abuses, you're talking about lack of freedom, and you're talking about lack of democracy. And people fail to understand, well, what's so important about democracy? Well, what happens is any prolonged period of time where you don't have it, you end up getting the West having to, as I say, clear up their messes. But also, more importantly, in the history of this planet, I think there's only been 2 occasions where 2 democracies have been at war with each other. So if you want the greatest guarantee that there will be peace, you ensure there's more democracies.
Okay, let's move on to...
Alpes has the answer.
He does, indeed. Let's move on to this concern that the radiation levels in Japanese food are spreading, and they're not just being... radiation levels are not just being found in the exclusion zone around the nuclear plant. Even though, it does say in this article in the South China Morning Post, that people of Hong Kong are still being urged to buy Japanese food. This is potentially quite a serious issue, isn't it?
In one sense, you could say, pity the poor Japanese. Let me turn this into a good news story, because we've got a lot of negative stories. After the devastation of the Second World War, the Japanese went on to become the 2nd largest economy in the world. We talk about the American spirit. It's very easy in the shadow of the American spirit to forget the spirit of great nations like the Japanese. And they will not only recover from this, but they'll actually, as they did in the last 40, 50 years, by becoming the world's 2nd largest economy, save the rest of the world economically as well. They did it before, they'll do it again. Immense spirit. And for that, despite tsunamis, earthquakes, radiation leaks, if this disaster had to be anywhere, and if it had to be anywhere, then you know that the Japanese, of all the peoples, could handle it because of what they've shown that they can do.
You've even seen that in the way that they've behaved in terms of there's been no looting and they're queuing up for medical attention.
A lesson for all of us. Absolutely extraordinary. And you will not find, perhaps anywhere in the world, a greater collection of patriotic individuals. And they were, you could see, they were doing it in the national interest, not just because they're well behaved. It went well beyond that, I think, with the Japanese. And the reason the yen rose is because the rest of the world knew that when disaster occurs in Japan, Japanese money from abroad will flood back, and it's not just economics alone for them, it's national pride.
Alpes, if we could very quickly change gears, efforts to bring change to the Middle East has been our conversation. FIFA, and now we have some challenges to Sepp Blatter. Just a few seconds.
He's been around, again, for 24 years. I'm not likening it to a dictatorship, of course I'm not. But I tell you what, term limits, 2 terms and you're out, that wouldn't be too bad. That wouldn't be too bad at all. Gordon Brown wished that, didn't he?
Well, there goes your invitation to his birthday party. Alpes, thanks very much. A quick reminder of our main news before we run along. Bombing has continued over the skies of Libya with more attacks on Colonel Gaddafi's compound.
Kamala and I will be back with more news and business very shortly. From both of us, goodbye.